Good morning and welcome to PyCon Sweden 2020. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our opening keynote, Samira Ali Gomes, who will talk about how we can implement strategies and policies to ensure that the tech that we create is inclusive. Together with Miriam Araye, Samira founded EMMSTech initiative that aims to empower and give opportunities to women of color and the underrepresented groups in the field of technology and entrepreneurship. So everybody, please join me and welcome Samira.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here and talk about diversity and how to effectively implement it into your tech teams. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself. Like Christine mentioned, my name is Samira. I am one of the founders of MSTechnology. I am the events and production manager, which means that I work a lot with our community. I try to kind of take care and make sure that we have the right activities and events, and that we're basically creating the right things for our community. I'm a Hyper Island alumni, recently graduated, so I have a background in tech and communication. But for me, a lot of my interest lies in diversity and inclusion, social innovation, and I guess in broad strikes, just trying to make the world a better place, I suppose. Everybody does their bit, little by little. So what is EMMSTech? Let me tell you a bit about what we do. So EMMSTechnology was founded almost exactly 2 years ago, which is crazy. I didn't even realize when I was making this presentation. So we were founded about 2 years ago when me, Mariam, and our two other original founders met for the first time. We didn't know each other. We didn't really have any connections. We all just knew, we all had met one person in common, and we had told that person kind of what our desires were and what we wanted to do, and she connected all of us. So EMMSTech really was born from the idea and the fact that oftentimes, you know, we were 4 different women from 4 different backgrounds, but we all felt like whenever we would walk into rooms in the tech industry, we would oftentimes be the only ones. We would be the only Black women, the only women, the only Black people, and so on and so forth. And that really kind of encouraged us to start EMMSTech. And the first thing we said was, we just want to create kind of a safe space. We just want to create a space where women can meet each other, where they can see each other and kind of see each other as well and empower each other, because that's very much what was lacking. So since 2018, we've grown our community to over 100 members. We've had one full-length program that was about 20 weeks, and we've had several workshops and meetups that have been sponsored and in collaboration with Internetstiftelsen, Foo Cafe, and many other organizations. So these are my current teammates. Mariam was one of our founders, and she works a lot with the kind of partnership sectors and the business sector of the organization. And while I'll take care of the events and the community side of things, Carmen really takes care of our kind of educational experience. Because while it's very important for us to work with women of color and to give them the space and the empowerment that they need, it's also important for us to also work with organizations, institutions, and companies to make sure that they are doing the work that they need to do to also create these inclusive spaces where women of color can come in and feel comfortable and feel included and feel like they are also able to take the space that they deserve. So we often get asked, why do we work with women of color? Why don't we work with women in general? Why don't we work with people of color? Why don't we work with everybody? Why aren't we trying to create an inclusive space for everyone? Well, of course, everybody deserves an inclusive space, but from our own experiences, we realized that whenever we would walk into different rooms, whether it was tech events for everybody or tech events just for women, there was always a big lack of women of color. And this came very much from our own experiences. And when we started 2 years ago, there wasn't really any data to back this up. There wasn't anybody that was saying like, yeah, actually, when you look at the numbers, this is actually what the problem is. So when we started, it very much just came from our own experiences and us saying, you know what, we feel this way and that's enough. And that was enough, because whenever we would do our events or meetups, people would join and people would say, you know what, I can also relate to this. So even though other people might not have seen where we were coming from, our community did. But luckily, over time, data is becoming more important and more available. So luckily, over time, we've also been able to gather some data on this. So Albright released a report earlier this year where they reported that 67% of non-white women feel that their identity or background and affect their career negatively. So this really just backed up the reason why we do what we do. And it also helped us put things into perspective for the Swedish market and the Nordic market, which is primarily where we work. Because oftentimes when we talk about diversity and inclusion, people often believe that, you know, it's an American problem. Sweden is an amazing society. We're all about inclusion. Everybody has the same options. And of course, Sweden is an amazingly inclusive society, but Sweden is not without its fault. Nobody is without its fault. Of course, this is based on kind of years of institutional systems and processes that have been put in place. So nobody can really run away from these issues. Nobody is perfect. So luckily, this was also able to help us show that this is also a Swedish problem and also a Swedish thing that we can deal with. So oftentimes, right now, diversity and inclusion is becoming a very hot topic in organizations. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody wants to implement ways to kind of work with diversity and inclusion. And a lot of these strategies and policies that are working on these issues are in a very top to bottom kind of way, which is great, of course, and it's definitely needed when you're working with change. However, it's also important to adopt a bottom-up approach to really drive the change home, where the teams that are in the organizations and the companies also are able to drive home the change. And it's not just strategies, but also people driving it. So why should you as a developer or as somebody who is part of a tech team work with diversity? Why should it be a focus for you and not just for the people taking care of the business, I suppose, the CEO, the CDO, and so on? My first kind of point is, it might sound a bit intense, but personally, I believe that it really just boils down to human rights and having respect and compassion for your fellow humans. If there is one thing that I hope people have learned from the protests earlier this year, or from the election, or from literally any point where we've talked about racism and biases, it's that oftentimes when we talk about racism or when we talk about biases, it's not just about, you know, this person said something that hurt me or this person made me feel upset. When we talk about lack of representation and diversity and racism and bias, which can be very big words and is quite a big topic, a lot of it really comes down to structures that are set in our society that hold certain people back. It's almost as simple as that. So these structures were put in place a very, very long time ago and have over time been built and strengthened. And we also can't deny that they're still in place today. Even though they're very old mentalities, they're still very much in place today. And that is why the top to bottom approach is very important, because it really tackles and challenges the systematic and structural processes that we have in place. But like I said, it's also important with a bottom up approach where we as humans also change and we also challenge the biases, attitudes, and behaviors that we have, and also the norms that we see around us. So it really comes down to being a good fellow human and giving each other respect, I suppose. But at the same time, it's also good and important for products and the tech that you create. So diversity can increase innovation and creativity and can help you create products that are accessible and good for a larger group of people. So we're going to go into a bit of numbers here, but there was a study that was made that was mentioned in the Harvard Business Review where they talked about two kinds of diversity. So there's inherent and acquired diversity. Inherent means it's the kind of things that you're born with, like sexual orientation, ethnicity, race. And acquired diversity includes traits that you acquire through experience, such as, if you travel and work in a different country, then you're able to appreciate and see cultural differences, right? And oftentimes when we talk about diversity, people talk about diversity of thought, right? And usually that comes with acquired diversity. So in the study that was made and published with the Harvard Business Review, they talked about companies that have leaders that have at least 3 inherent and 3 acquired diversity traits as having 2-dimensional diversity. So leaders that both had inherent and acquired diversity traits were two-dimensional leaders. So what the study found was that 2-dimensional leaders out-innovate and outperform other companies. So employees at these companies are 45% likelier to report that the company's market share grew over previous years, and they're also 70% likelier to report that the company captured a new market. So why is that? Why is it that companies that have leaders that both have a lot of inherent and a lot of acquired diversity traits outperform and out-innovate other companies? Well, 2-dimensional leaders unlock innovation in the company because they also bring in people that have different perspectives and different, they see things in different ways. So they kind of unlock innovation because people are thinking very differently. They're seeing new possibilities, and they all have different perspectives. But then they also create an environment where these outside of the box ideas are heard and encouraged, because there are people in leadership positions that can relate to and vouch for minority employees. So employees that also have these inherent traits. So inherently diverse employees and teammates are able to understand and see unmet needs in under-leveraged markets, which helps companies outperform others. And when they're able to see these needs and these things that other people might not see, having leaders that will encourage them and support them is very important. And to support this, in the study, they also pointed out that companies where diverse leadership is lacking, so in companies where the leaders don't necessarily have two-dimensional diversity traits, minorities were less likely to get endorsement for their ideas. So compared to straight white men, women were 20% less likely, people of color were 24% less likely, and members of the LGBTQ plus community were 21% less likely. So having diverse leaders and having diverse team members helps you create better products because you're able to see new possibilities, and having the leadership also helps you actually bring those ideas to light. And that also brings us to diversity being profitable for companies. So I'm sure you can do the math at this point. When you're innovating and you're seeing new markets, of course, that leads to new money, but we can also put some numbers on this. So McKinsey does a diversity report quite regularly where they look at a bunch of different companies and how they're doing. And for their 2015 report, they found that companies that were in the top 25th percentile for gender diversity on their executive team were 15% more likely to experience above average profits. And new numbers have also shown that that 15% goes up to even 21%. And when it comes to culturally and ethnically diverse executive teams, companies are 33% more likely to see better than average profits. So to sum up kind of a little bit why you should care, I suppose, diversity helps your team become more innovative and creative, and it helps you see and tackle new challenges, which grows your business, your profits, the work that you do, and in the meantime, you get to kind of be a good human being, I suppose. So what can we do? How can we actually start working with this? As I mentioned, a lot of work happens and needs to happen in the top to bottom approach. But there's also things that you can do in a bottom-up approach and as a team member. And these tips are going to be a little bit of a mixture of that, and also hopefully kind of lead you in the right direction of how to start talking about diversity within your team. So my first tip is always to start early, because once you get going, it can be very difficult to reverse. So this data comes from an Instagram post that we made at EMMSTech sometime last year, and it comes from Google's own diversity report from 2018. So Google has over 98,000 employees, but only 1.4% of them are Latinas, which, if you break down the numbers, is about 1,370 Latinas in the company. And Google is a huge business, and I'm not completely sure how many people they hire each year, but if we say that they hire 2,000 more Latinx over the next year or so, which is a little bit more than double what they have right now, that would still only raise their number about 3%. So even bringing in 2,000 more people would only raise that minority number to 3%. So when a company gets to that size, with those kind of numbers on diversity, it becomes very difficult to implement these changes, right? Because now they're bringing in 2,000, and that's only bringing it up to 3. You're bringing in another 2,000, and that's bringing another 2,000. That might only just bring it up to 4 or 5 or 6,000 of 6%. So this is why, like I said, it's important to start early, because if you very early on have members from minority communities, especially in leadership and higher positions, these people will be able to help you bring on the diverse talent that you need. And they will be able to see kind of, okay, these are the communities, or these are the platforms and forums where we need to go and find diverse and minority talent. And on the flip side of that as well, the reason why a lot of people, and especially minorities, end up leaving companies is because they feel a lack of representation and inclusion. So they'll enter a company very excited and ready to do good and, be their best self and maybe even make some changes. But once they realize that they're the only woman, or they're the only Latina, they're the only person from an LGBTQ community, it creates an environment where they don't feel completely comfortable because they don't have any representation. So it's very important to start with these things very early on and put people of color and minorities in leadership positions where they can make change and where they can create an environment in which they feel comfortable and open to making the change that is needed, and can bring in more people like that. Something else to consider and to think very much about is collecting data. So this is something I talk a lot about, because one of the most important parts of tech is data, right? Literally everything that is done within tech is based on data. However, every time we work with diversity and inclusion, it seems that this is one of those things that we kind of just try to get a feel for, and we just wing our way through it, and let's just try to do this thing, but we don't try to collect any data on it. So when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's equally important for us to collect and gain data. How many women do you have in your company? How many were born in another country? How many come from a different cultural background? How many women do you have in your interviewing pool? Like when you're interviewing for people, who is in that pool? How many Black people do you have? How many people are coming in each year? So gaining this data can seem very scary, and of course, this data shouldn't be used in a malicious way, right? Data is only as good or as bad as the people that use it. But if you want your company to start doing real work when it comes to diversity, you need to know what you're working with. It's very important, because it's only by knowing the current situation and knowing kind of where you're at right now that you can set goals to really make a change in the future. And it's difficult to track when you say your goal is just to have more minorities in your company, because what does that mean? Is it 1 or 10 new people? Is it, and what does minority mean? Who is a minority in your company? You might have great ethnical and cultural diversity, but maybe you only have 2 women out of 100. So then that's maybe what you should work on. But you won't see that unless you actually look at the data and really try to make those kind of connections and make those choices. And that is also something that we at EMMSTech are working with, because like I said, for a very long time, especially in Sweden, it's been very difficult to collect this data and to even find any data on this, which has made it very difficult for us to back up our work. And so we are now working with Make Equal and Equality Check right now to actually collect some of that data, and to look at, okay, what can we actually do? And what does the situation actually look like, to then see what can we do. And so one thing that's also important to remember is that change is ongoing. So luckily, we get the chance to talk to and work with a lot of companies, schools, and institutions at EMS. And oftentimes they want us to come in and do a workshop on biases, and kind of look at, okay, what are the biases? What are some of the biases that we have in our company? How can we work with that? And that's great. I love doing it. It's always a lot of fun. You meet a ton of new people. But talking about and confronting these biases that we have as humans is a great way to start tackling the issues within our teams. However, I always try to make it a point to remind people that it's very important to remember that one workshop isn't going to change things within the company or within your team. One workshop where somebody comes in and talks about biases and talks about, and starts kind of pointing out some of the biases that you have in your company isn't going to change everything, and everybody's not going to miraculously wake up the next day and think, okay, I'm going to become a better person now and everything will be fixed. If you've hired a team to do a workshop, or if you're thinking about hiring a team to do a workshop at your company, of course, I would tell you to contact EMS, but it's also okay if you don't, of course. But make sure that you bring them in after a couple of months as well. Look at how the company has changed. Look at what you can do to continue changing. Have you actually addressed the biases that you have within your company? Have you actually kind of put in some new strategies and some new policies? Change doesn't happen overnight. You don't learn a new language overnight, right? I wish you could learn a new language overnight. It would solve a lot of problems in my life, but you don't. And it's the same thing with change. Change doesn't happen overnight. And it's the same with diversity and biases. It's something that we need to continue working on over time to make sure that the change is properly implemented and that the work keeps going and that we keep moving forward, and that things are just always changing and becoming better. My next note is on rewriting job ads. So it's been shown that when women apply for jobs, they'll only apply for certain jobs that they 100% fit the criteria for, right? This is something that has been talked about over and over again. And it's also been shown that a lot of companies will add in a lot of points in their ads that aren't maybe completely necessary, but they kind of do it because they want to just bring in the best people in the business, right? They want to make sure that the talent is actually going above and beyond. But what you see here is kind of this miscommunication and this miss, where they want to bring in the best talent, of course, but they are doing it in a way that is discouraging a lot of very potentially great talent because of the way that they're writing their job ads. So when you are going out there and you're looking for new team members, because often that's kind of the two side of it, right? One part of working with diversity and inclusion is working on the culture and the inclusion in your company. And that kind of depends on company to company. There is no one size fits all. So there's that part, but there's also the part of bringing in new talent. And it's important that when you are bringing in new talent, not necessarily that you have any quotas or that you kind of, try to favor some people, but it's important that you're giving everybody a fair chance. And the easiest, kind of most bottom, like the number one step would be rewriting your job ads. So rewriting them in ways that makes them more inclusive, that makes them more open, that makes more people want to apply, and that just opens up doors for a lot more people rather than kind of trying to aim super high when it's shown that minorities usually only apply for things that they 100% fit in for. So when you're writing your job ads, really just write down what is important. Is it really important that the person has a master's, or is it really important that the person has 20 years of HTML experiences when nobody really might have it? So really look at the basics and really be honest in your job ads about what is actually important. And on the same note, and also connecting it to the start early slides, look at where you're hiring your teams. Look at how you're hiring your teams as well. Are you recruiting, or are you doing open calls? So when you have more people of color, or people from diverse backgrounds, or people from minority communities in your company, and you have a job ad out, if you're telling your team that you're hiring for a certain position, they will share that in relevant groups and forums where people from their community will be able to see it. And that's kind of the point of casting a wider net. So when you already have these people in, they will be able to show you where you need to look and kind of where you need to start working to get more people, more diverse people into the interviewing pool. And and something that's also been mentioned quite a lot is that usually when at least 50% of the interviewing pool is women or people of color, it becomes even more likely that that the person that gets that position is from a minority community. So that is why I'm really trying to push on the fact that the work starts very early on. You need to make sure that people are also applying to your jobs, because otherwise that's when people are going to say, oh, but we don't see any minorities don't apply for jobs. There aren't any out there. They're not leaving. They're not graduating, so we can't hire them. They are, and of course they're minorities. So of course there aren't as many of them, perhaps. But if you still make the work to actually, okay, let's make sure that there are people in our pool that can apply and that are applying, then that will help you kind of set the diversity and inclusion in your company as well. And like I said, if you already have that if you already are starting with having a pretty diverse group of people in your company, they'll be able to help you and hold you accountable for where to look. However, it's very important to remember that the work doesn't just fall on them, right? It's also up to you, either as the team leader or either as the CEO or CDO, or just it's also up to the leadership in the company to also contact organizations, contact forums, contact institutions and schools that are reaching out to these minority communities that you also want to bring in. It's hard work. Working with diversity is hard work. But if you start today and you start little by little, you'll be able to slowly build up a network, for example, that you can go back to each time you're hiring to make sure that you are getting a diverse pool of candidates. So once you've done this work, it becomes easier over time to add to it and to make the process easier further down the lines. And that's the important thing to remember. Working with diversity is a big, I suppose, issue. It's a very big topic, but it's important to start slowly and taking kind of smaller steps and asking for help from organizations such as EMMSTech. And there are a lot of other amazing organizations out there that are doing the work that you can always reach out to if you actually want to do the work within your company. They'll be more than happy to help. And so I also want to talk about chief diversity officers. And this is kind of, I suppose, my last point on this. But at the beginning of this year, a lot of people were implementing CDOs. And the idea was that people in these positions were going to take care of diversity and inclusion in the companies. Some people have VPs of belonging. Some people have kind of happiness managers, but a lot of kind of bigger companies implemented chief diversity officers, which of course is great. I'm very happy that a lot of companies are doing this and that they're actually looking at, okay, how can we work with diversity and how can we effectively do this? And of course, the simplest way to think about it might be, all right, we need to work with diversity. Let's get somebody into the C-suite. And that's I suppose, the logical thought process. However, I don't have anything against chief diversity officers, but chief diversity officers aren't always effective, and they're not always good if you're implementing it just to show people that you're open to tackling structures and the lack of diversity in your company. If that's all they're doing really, which is just showing it to people, then they're not going to be effective and they're not going to be useful. So something that was also realized over the year was that many chief diversity officers don't actually have the same mandate and power as some of their peers in the C-suite, because at the end of the day, they are chief diversity officers, right? They are in the C-suite. Many of them don't have a budget. Many of them don't report directly to the CEO. And that makes it very hard for them to create the change that they want and the change that needs to be done. They don't necessarily have data. They don't have a head count of the people in their company. And the activity and results that they bring forward aren't always technically considered mandatory or things that the company has to do. It's very much, in some companies, it's very much, okay, you have this idea that we should do this thing. Let's see if we can fit it in. While other positions in the C-suite, such as the CEO or the COO or the CFO, CTO, when they bring forward strategies, oftentimes they have the budget to pull it through, or they also have kind of the mandate to really say, okay, everybody needs to start doing this. But the CDO in most companies don't always have that. And this obviously makes it very difficult to implement the proper change that they want to see. So how do we expect people to create long-lasting change if we don't give them the tools and the resources that they need to do it? So I'm not saying that you shouldn't appoint a chief diversity officer. However, if you are going to appoint one, make sure that you give them the same mandate and that you do to other positions at the same level. And also be aware and know why you're implementing one. Is it that you want them to focus with the recruitment? Is it the culture at your company that isn't inclusive? What is it within your company that you feel is lacking when it comes to diversity and inclusion? And what is it that you want them to work on? And even if you don't know why, when and if the CDO is able to point out key areas and key changes that need to be made, they need to have that power to actually implement those changes and those strategies that they see fit to actually be effective. Because otherwise, if you're not completely sure and then they mention something and you're not completely sure that you believe in what they're saying, then they're not going to be effective and they're not going to be able to implement the change that they want to see and that needs to be done within the company. And so when you're working with all of these kind of tips and all of these strategies, something that's very important to remember is that everything is very specific to the team, right? There is no one size fits all. I can't tell you, all right, if you rewrite all of your job ads, everything will be fine. And in just a couple of months, you will have the best diversity and inclusion at your company. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of different types of work. And so it's very important to look into your company, look at, okay, where is it that we actually need to change? And that's where the data is very important. And when you are working with diversity, if you have minority people and if you have people from minority backgrounds in your company, it's very important that you listen to them. Don't just tell them what you're going to do to give them a better working place or to bring in more people like them. Make sure that you're actually talking to them and that you're actually creating a space where what they say isn't going to get them reprimanded and isn't going to kind of, turn things around for them. Give them the space where they can say, you know what, this is the problem that we have in this company. This is the problem that I have with this company. This is what makes me feel like this isn't inclusive. This is what makes me feel like we don't have enough diversity, let them say those things and be okay with it. It can be very hard to hear, I suppose, but it's very important to let them kind of say those things so that you can actually create change. And that also brings me to my next point of that oftentimes, especially in the earlier years, when initiatives and different ideas would start in companies on how to affect change, how to increase diversity, how to create inclusive cultures, a lot of these initiatives are oftentimes spearheaded by the people that first notice them, right? So it's the people that are first noticing that, okay, we actually have a lack of inclusion in this company, or there aren't that many women in this company. Those are usually the first people that notice. And oftentimes those people are usually the underrepresented as well, because it's very easy for underrepresented people to realize when they are underrepresented and when there aren't other people like them. And so oftentimes when they realize that, they'll start these initiatives and want to kind of change things in the company, both for the company, but also for their own community, because they want to help people in their community also get into these spaces and these rooms that they don't feel 100% kind of included in. But it's important to remember that these people are often feeling quite lonely, and it's a very lonely feeling to realize that there isn't somebody like you. And so it's very important that we remember not to make and not to let these people do all the work on their own. Like I've said a couple of times under this presentation, working with diversity is tiring. It's very rewarding, at least for me. I love working with it. I love seeing people feel empowered, and seeing somebody feel like they are represented is an amazing and incredible feeling. But actually implementing that work is tiring. It's very tiring until you get the reward. It's not easy work. It takes time, it takes energy, and it takes funds. It does take money as well to work with diversity and to work with these initiatives. And often when these things are worked on by the underrepresented in the company, it usually takes from the work that they're already doing. So oftentimes, if you have a software developer, for example, that already has a job as a software developer, and they're working full hours, they're getting paid for that, and at the same time, they're also trying to put time into increasing the diversity at the company or within the team, that work that they're doing, they're not being paid for, and they're not they're not given the time either to actually do that work, right? What's happening is that they are doing their work full time, and then they have another part-time job where they are trying to help the diversity with the company. So if you're seeing a team member that is trying to make this change, just as a team member, not even necessarily as a leader, while of course it's important for leaders to also spearhead this, but as a teammate, help them out. Take on a bit of the load, ask them, what is it that I can do to make this easier for you? Is there something within the everyday work that we're doing that I can help you with so that you can put more time into this? Or, is there something within this that you want me to help you with? Do you want me to go with you to a conference? Do you want me to go with you to a school? Do you want me to help you with rewriting the job ads, or, recruiting? Whatever it is, do try to help out, because like I said, these people are already tired. They're alone in the company, they're not represented, and now they're having to do extra work to help themselves within the company, kind of. So do help them. And if you're a team leader, recognize this and recognize that if diversity and inclusion really is important for your company, do give these people the time to work on it. Give them and other people in the company the time to work on these things, to create these changes for your company. And that's where the bottom-up approach comes. If your company is putting in policies and strategies and anti-discrimination policies in, then it's also important that the people also get to do some work to really drive those policies and strategies and changes home to really be effective. And I want to finish this off by saying that the power of tech is incredible. So at least 59% of the world is connected to the internet. And more and more so every day, we're realizing that everybody's very connected, and both to each other, but both to the tech that is out there. And it's becoming more and more important that everything that we do as developers, as CEOs, as business people, as the people kind of behind the screen, everything that we do is able to create long-lasting change. And I think that that's something that hasn't really been talked about in the tech community for a very long time. But if you look at, for example, this election and the last election, US election, and how Facebook kind of played a part in that, you realize more and more so that tech isn't just tech. It's not just a website. Nothing is just an app. It's not just a thing that we use. It's a part of our everyday life. It's a part of how we move. It's a part of how we work and how we live. And so as developers, you actually have a very, very big responsibility, not to scare you, but you have a very big responsibility to make sure that the code that you're putting out, the tech and the products that you're putting out, that they're actually, that they're actually accessible and that they're actually ethical. It's important that you look within yourself and really think about, what is the change that I want to make? What is it that I want to leave behind in this world? And how can I make that a part of the work that I do? Because you have an incredible opportunity whereby the things that you create can stay around for a very long time, right? It's not a piece of paper that is going to wilt away for a while. It's literally connected to the internet, and it's endless and it's forever. So really think about the power of tech and how the work that you do can change the lives of hundreds of people, thousands of people, millions of people. It can change and affect people in incredible ways. And so you really have the opportunity to come in from the back end and say, you know what, we're going to make sure that this is ethical, that this is just. Because I always tell people, tech is only a tool. Tech is not necessarily bad, and it's not necessarily good. It's only as bad or as good as the people that use it and the people that are using that tool and that are creating it. And you are those people. You are the people that are using this tool of tech to create even more tech tools, right? So the tech that you put out is only as good as you. And if you know you're a good person, which I believe all of you are, of course, and you know that you believe in, the justness of the world and, rättvisa, and the goodness of the world, I suppose, make sure to put that out there. Make sure that every bit of code that you write has a bit of that and has a bit of you in it, and continue to make the change and continue to be a part in using the power of tech to make the world a better place. Thank you. That was my keynote.
Thank you a lot, Samira. That was a great presentation. I love the point about the responsibility that we have as developers.
Definitely.
Sorry.
Oftentimes when you look at kind of like tech movies, like, the social dilemma, not social dilemma, but like the Facebook movie and a lot of tech movies, tech seems to be very centered around, the CEO and the CTO, and, they're kind of sitting in a room writing code and creating these amazing products. But, they might be the business people and kind of be the face of the company, but really it is the developers and the development teams that are really driving the company. They're really the ones that are creating the products and that are putting in the work. So yeah, as developers, you definitely have huge responsibilities and huge kind of, you're a big part of the change.
Yes, and everybody has the freedom to decide, is it something that I want to implement or not, and how do I make it just or not?
Yeah.
So now I would like to shout out to the audience to ask questions to Samira. I guess there's a bit of a delay, so I'm not sure if things are rolling in immediately. But until then, how can I support and find more information about EMMSTech?
So you can find us on Instagram, of course, also our website, but on Instagram, it's EMMSTechnology. And of course, you can check out our website, emstech.se. And I think the best way to support us is to kind of let us know that you see us, that you like the work that we do. If you know any women of color that are in the tech industry, share our space with them. Let them know that we're there. We're a very small company, a very small organization, and it's difficult to kind of do the outreach that bigger companies and organizations can do. So we're always very happy when people can help us reach new audiences and reach new people. So yeah, just check us out. Let us know what you think about our work, and spread. I think the best way to help us out as well, I guess, because it's interesting when you work with diversity, because of course you want diversity to get better, but then that also means that you don't work anymore. And so there's kind of like that thing. And I'm okay with that. If I need to stop working with EMS because companies are becoming better at working with diversity and inclusion, of course I'll miss it. But I'm okay with that, because that means that we've done something right and that the world is going, in a better direction. So something that you can also do, I suppose, is, make that change within your company, be the driving factor, be the one that says, you know what, we need to address these issues, we need to implement these changes. That's also something that you could do.
Yes, I hope, Alexandra, that is covered in your question in what can we as small companies do.
Yeah.
So then I would like to highlight the next one. Is there a general willingness among companies to adopt the diversity agenda?
So I think over time, I would say over the past couple of years, there's definitely been a shift. I think you can see more companies, like over time, you see more companies releasing diversity reports, for example. That wasn't something that people really did a couple of years ago. And even just within this year, of course, after, unfortunately, the protests earlier this year, both in Sweden and across the world, you can see more people kind of being willing to, adopt the diversity and kind of work with it a bit more. I think a bit of that is coming from kind of social pushback almost. People are realizing that it's becoming very important for consumers and for their customers and their fans that they work with these questions. So it's kind of coming from that, like, okay, people want to see this, people want us to work on this, so we will be working on this. But also, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, diversity is highly profitable. It helps companies outperform and out-innovate. So there also is kind of a sense of some people are realizing it and thinking, okay, you know what, this is something that we need to invest in because it is going to help us in the long run. But I would say it also depends on the kind of company, because if, like I said, it also costs a lot to work with diversity and implement these things. So if you have kind of short-sighted leaders and companies where, they're only looking at the bottom line as soon as possible, then they might see that a lot of money is going into diversity, but they're not getting a lot of money back at the moment. But if you're, as a company, are working kind of towards the future, then putting down that money right now is going to give you a lot more money and make you a lot more profitable in the future. So it depends on the company, but I would say that there is a general willingness to work more with diversity. I think a lot of companies don't know how to do it, but in general, definitely a willingness to do it.
Yeah, I would hope that the companies are not only looking at the money, but also measure maybe the happiness and feeling of belonging of their employees.
Absolutely. That's why when talking about diversity, inclusion kind of comes in the same strand, because it's the diversity of making sure that you have different kinds of people, but also that those people feel like they belong and that their voices are being heard and that they are being included. And I think sometimes companies very easily get focused on that diversity part, where they try to bring in and they try to raise the diversity, but then they don't work on that inclusion, which is also a problem and leads to minorities leaving the company. And then they're going back in circles with the same problem. And then they don't see themselves as the problem. So they're just thinking, oh, we're hiring minorities and they're all leaving. When in reality, that's not necessarily the case. They're leaving because you don't have an inclusive company culture. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then we can go on to the next one. What do you think is a good approach for a company to audit diversity and inclusion policies?
I would say start internally. Kind of start internally to have these discussions. Talk with the people in the company. Talk with employees about, okay, what is kind of the general feeling? What do people want us to start looking at? Like, is there something specifically that people feel are missing, both in diversity and inclusion? But then I would also say that it's a good idea when auditing to bring in external organizations or companies or teams, because oftentimes when it's very difficult to kind of look within yourself and notice your flaws and kind of admit to yourself, like, yeah, actually, we're not that good at this and we're not that good at that, especially if you haven't worked with diversity for a very long time. Or at all before this, there might be a lot of flaws and a lot of things that you might need to work on. So it might be very difficult for you to kind of admit those things to yourself. So I would say, if you can, do bring in external teams to help you kind of look at your policies and kind of the culture and what is happening at the moment. Because they'll be able to kind of look at, okay, actually, these are a couple things that you need to change, and these are a couple things, and they might be things that you don't even think about. So I would say that that's a good approach to kind of start internally, looking at, okay, what is it that we kind of want to audit? What is it that people are saying? Because then you're also not going to get completely shocked and surprised when they bring in the audit, kind of. So kind of start internally, look at, okay, what are the conversations? What is it? Because that's also one of the things when I mentioned earlier about working with the minority communities in your company. Oftentimes when working with diversity in companies are kind of just telling their minority employees, like, okay, this is what we're going to do to make this a better workplace for you. And sometimes those are good things. Sometimes they're implementing good changes. But sometimes as well, it's not necessarily the changes that you want to see. Sometimes as a minority, you're realizing that actually this isn't the problem. The problem isn't this thing that you're mentioning. The problem is actually this other thing. But because there's not a discussion and there's not a conversation, it's just the top to bottom. It's just the executive team coming in and saying, we're going to do this to make the inclusion better. They're coming in saying that, but they're not having a discussion with their employees, and they're not having a discussion with the people about what it is that actually needs to be changed. So that's also something to really keep in mind. Have that discussion with the minority employees in your company. Don't just tell them the change that you are going to make the workplace better for them. Actually ask them what they want to see, what changes they want to see. So I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit.
Great. Okay, any more question? As a developer, what is a baby step I can raise in order to have the right conversation?
This is always very difficult because, I mean, of course, it's very difficult as an employee or as a teammate to kind of be the one to be like, hi, I want us to talk about diversity today, because, you know, it's a very scary topic and discussion to have. But I would say one baby step that you could have is perhaps if you've been in the team long enough, and if you have kind of, so at my job, for example, we have like general assembly meetings. So everybody meets up and we all talk about kind of what's been happening, and we meet up every other 2 weeks. So I think a baby step, if this is a conversation that you want to have, is during that meeting, maybe bring it up, put it into the agenda. I wanted to talk about how we're working with diversity in this company. And so you can just start that conversation. It doesn't need to be a huge kind of, you know, this is what we are going to do, and these are our next steps, and these are the policies that we have. But just at that first meeting, just kind of bring up like, okay, is this something that we want to focus on? Is this something that we have focused on? Like, just kind of just make it as I just want to see where we as a company and as a team are when it comes to this discussion. So I would say that that's, I suppose, the baby step. Do that, just to kind of get the conversation going. And then from there, you'll kind of know more so what to do. Because if they're open to it, then you can continue pushing it. And you can continue kind of, okay, well, then maybe we should have a diversity workshop. Maybe we should have a bias workshop. Maybe we should have I suppose, like a reflection session or just a session where we can talk about the things that we're seeing in our company. And if they completely shut it down or they're not open to it, then you kind of have to decide, like, okay, do I want to spearhead this? And do I want to kind of convince them, like, okay, you can send my presentation to them and be like, okay, this is why we need to have diversity. It's good as a human being, it's profitable, it's better for our product. You know, you can pull out that data. If that is something that you want to do, pull out that data and show them, like, okay, we haven't worked with this. You don't seem willing to work with it, but this is why we should do it. So that's, of course, something that you can do. Or I'm not going to say just leave the company if you don't want to do it, because of course you might like your job. And I'm not either the kind of person to just jump out of a company. But yeah, like I said, just kind of slowly mentioning it in that first talk, in that first meeting of, okay, what is it that we're doing? Either in that team meeting or in your one-to-one or your monthly or weekly chat with your team leader. Just in one of those kind of rooms, just mention it and see what the vibe is, how the company is feeling, and then try to push it forward kind of slowly is what I would say. And as a developer as well, because I'm aware of the time kind of running out, as a developer as well, when you're creating, I don't know exactly what kind of products you're creating, and this kind of falls, I guess, a little bit into UX actually, but a way to bring diversity and inclusion, that conversation into the company as a developer, is if you're creating specific products, like I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, kind of mention, like, okay, don't we want to reach a new market? Do we want to kind of look at other target groups, other demographics that we haven't looked at so far? So kind of when you start bringing in that conversation, you can also start looking at, like, okay, depending on what product you have, let's say, okay, we have a product, like, okay, but what about people that are deaf? Like, how can they use our products? And start asking those questions, like, can people that are blind use our products? Can people that can't read? Because even though a lot of people read today, not everybody reads still, and not everybody has digital literacy. Can those people access our products? You know, kind of start asking those questions to make your team think. Because on one end, they're thinking about, okay, how can we make the product more accessible? But at the same time, you're also questioning kind of the diversity of your team and the diversity of the people that are working on your products. So that can also be kind of, I suppose, a good way to kind of bring in that conversation of, you know, are we really creating products that are accessible to everybody?
Great. Thank you so much. Great questions and great answers. I hope everybody feels heard. And thank you again, Samira, for joining PyCon. And I wish EMMSTech great success. And everybody reach out to EMMSTech if you want to learn more and if you need help to increase diversity in your company. We will branch out the conference into the different tracks now. So in the program on our website, you will find the links to the different sessions. And in the main track, we will meet each other at 3 p.m. To see the keynote from Akash Hochheim. So thank you again and take care.
You too. Bye, everyone.